What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Stack in the Box College Football Edition. I'm your host, Reed Wallach, joined, as always, with Cody Williams and our college football playoff semifinal national championship correspondent, Josh Yourish. Josh, welcome back to the show. We're here to get you set for all things national championship game, Ohio State versus Notre Dame. We're going to talk a little portal. We're going to do some player props and a bunch of college football stuff. First, I'll start with you, Cody. How's it going, man?
Doing good. As Josh was so nice to message me on the night of the Cotton Bowl, still reeling from losing Texas first half plus 3.5 because Travion Henderson decided to take it 75 yards to the house. So I'm still not over that. Might not get over it for a while.
And Josh, how are you? Obviously, our resident Penn State. I know you didn't go there, but Penn State faithful. I still think you're part of the
Penn State family. My dad went there, my sister went there, so definitely still have some ties. But I took it all right. I'm doing all right. I probably took it better than Cody took the bad beat in the first half of Texas. So I had to make sure to remind him that night.
Yeah, let's talk. I guess before we talk some portal stuff, let's talk about the two semifinal games. We will start with Thursday night, the Orange Bowl. Josh hinted at it. Penn State goes down to Notre Dame. I'll take first word here. Just, I guess we could each give like a little comment, what we thought, some takeaways from the game. Obviously, Drew Aller lays an egg in that one. But I would say that, to me, what I found interesting in the game was Penn State, more on the Notre Dame side, it didn't even feel like they had much control of that game. They did have a really good scoring drive before to start the second half that tied the game up, but it really felt like this game was more about Penn State failing to pull away from Notre Dame and Notre Dame showing, I don't want to get lost in like the intangible conversation, but finding a way to win. I do think certain teams have that quality, and it felt like more that Penn State failed to secure the win more than Notre Dame, this real like fantastic performance out of them. I don't know if you guys felt the same way. Cody, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely somewhat of that. I also thought it was a really good defensive game plan from Al Golden to not allow Penn State to pull away. Like, he basically said, okay, we're going to let these running backs and Tyler Warren beat us, but, if you really want to pull away, go ahead and let your receivers do something. And we knew that was a weakness for Penn State this entire season, and it turns out they couldn't do it. 0 catches by receivers and, 0 catches for -3 yards, which is just a hilarious stat line because of the game-ending lateral play that we saw. But I think that Al Golden and that Notre Dame defense did a really good job of daring Penn State to use their weakness to beat them, and Penn State couldn't do it. Like, part of it was on Drew Aller, but part of it was the fact that his receivers weren't open this entire game.
Josh, any thoughts there? I imagine we're about to get some deep thoughts here, but anything jump out to you from the game? Anything we just said?
Yeah, it's the wide receiver conversation, and I think this is going to color my perspective on the championship game and kind of has been something I've thought about through the entire playoff. Wide receivers, we've had tons of them in recent years, tons of great receivers. This draft class for wide receivers is kind of down. Across the country, there aren't many great teams that have receivers. Georgia had a problem with receivers. Notre Dame doesn't have a lot of great receivers. Like, this has been an issue for a lot of the good teams, the haves and the have-nots. Penn State was a have-not all year. And I think it's a reason that they struggled to pull away. Like, even the Boise State game, the Fiesta Bowl, it looked like everyone could just enjoy New Year's Eve. That game was over in the first quarter. And then they let the Broncos kind of creep back in it, even without Ashton Genty doing anything. And then to the defensive side of the ball for Penn State, because that's obviously the way my perspective is looking at the Nittany Lions. Tom Allen potentially leaving to go to Clemson. I don't think James Franklin was like scratching and clawing to keep him in Happy Valley. I think he's okay to part ways. He wasn't going to fire him, but that defense had some serious structural issues on the back end. And, Jaden Greathouse going for a career high. Yes, Cam Miller fell down, but Cam Miller's been a problem all year. Like, there were issues with that Penn State team. And I don't think the issues were necessarily James Franklin. I'd be interested in your thoughts. Like, do you think they just should have sat on it and gone to overtime? Because in my opinion, you give your quarterback who's done this. He did it against USC. He closed out a late game against Minnesota. Like, you have some trust there with Aller this season. So I was fine with them pushing it, and your quarterback made a terrible decision. But what do you guys think about that and blaming Franklin? Because a lot of people want to. I have a hard time in this game.
No, this wasn't to me like a big game James type deal. Like they just lost. Like that's the issue with commenting on sports. That like the person to blame is Drew Aller, and sure, James Franklin as the coach, you put certain obviously James Franklin said, "Hey, we're going to go try and get points here." And it's funny because I know everyone was kind of dragging Greg McElroy because he said right before Drew Aller gets out there, he's like, "You put the ball in his hands. He's so protective of the ball."
Yeah,
I said in my column, Drew Aller's really protective of the ball. He had a bad game. It's no hesitation that you try and get the ball into field goal range. They were at like their own 20. And what's forgotten is they actually did take the conservative approach. They ran the ball to Singleton. Notre Dame was so far back in coverage expecting a deep pass that Singleton ripped off 15 yards or so. I think it was like 12 to 15 yards. All of a sudden, Penn State's like 30, 20, 25 yards with 30 seconds left from getting into field goal range. It was not like some ill-advised, and I made the mistake as well. If you go back to the Georgia-Notre Dame game, I was thinking Georgia also needs to go and get points before halftime, and then Gunnar Stockton fumbles. It's almost like a similar thing. Obviously, the stakes much higher. I guess I'm aggressive in that way where I think you need to try and take advantage of stealing possessions. Notre Dame ball out of half. No, that's not relevant. I got mixed up with my game. But, Penn State to me, Drew Aller made a really bad mistake. That's not on coaching. That's on the quarterback. And that game didn't scream to me like, oh, Penn State blew that one.
Yeah, they didn't lay an egg.
Yeah, they should have won the game, but that doesn't mean they blew it. There's two different ways, in my opinion.
No, I'm in the same boat. Like, this was not a James Franklin game. Like,
Yeah.
you can blame a lot of people for it. It was not James Franklin. Like, I do think you can blame Tom Allen for some of his, schematic stuff in that game, because I thought Penn State's defense would have a lot more success against Notre Dame than they did, frankly. And so, and Drew Aller obviously deserves plenty of blame for the way he played and making that, a very amateur decision, throwing that ball in that position. But I'm with Reed, and maybe I'm over aggressive as well. I mean, that's kind of my personality. If you've ever seen me on this show making my best bets, but I do think that when Penn State got the ball back, sitting on it was never a consideration in my mind. I would have crucified him way more for sitting on it in that spot than I would him trying to get points. And it's one of those decisions. You run a couple plays, and if you don't have anything going, then you sit on it. Then you run the clock out. If you realize you're not going to get there, you don't put the ball in harm's way. But like Reed said, they reeled off a run with Nick Singleton. You're moving the ball. You keep trying to move the ball in this situation. So I don't think this is a James Franklin thing. And I think any Penn State fan that's, trying to skewer James Franklin for this, I don't know, man. This postseason for James Franklin has been, to me, a positive for him, because we've had two very high-end opponents in big games in the Big Ten championship game. And yes, Penn State came out on the losing end of both of them, but it wasn't the big game James in either of those games that cost them. It was just in Oregon, you played a team that's better than you, quite frankly. And then in Notre Dame, a bad mistake by a young quarterback who is coming back, which is probably a good thing for Drew Aller.
Yeah, and Penn State will likely be back in the mix. Plenty of good news. Obviously, Tom Allen leaving. Penn State has turned over their defensive coordinator position quite a bit over the James Franklin tenure. So I have a feeling they'll be okay one way or another. They are also bringing back Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. Both running backs will be back with Drew Aller in the backfield. I said it all year. I thought Penn State was lacking a dude at wide receiver. We'll see if they go out on the portal and get some guy that can emerge and be a true threat at wide receiver, not just tight end. Switching gears, though, to the Cotton Bowl. Ohio State pulls away late, takes care of Texas. Kind of a weird, to me, Notre Dame, Penn State had more of a flow to it, even if it wasn't as, electric. Ohio State, Texas, was kind of clunky for a while. Ohio State got off to a hot start. Texas seemingly settled in. Ohio State, a few self-inflicted wounds before they end up pulling away late. Touchdown drive, and then obviously the Jack Sawyer scoop and score as Texas kind of lays whatever adjective you want to throw in there or verb around the goal line, which I pointed out on the show has always been a concern for them. Cody, what are some of your takeaways from the Cotton Bowl?
So I think that I think Texas's defense played a phenomenal game, like slowing down Ohio State to the level that they did. Like you talk about self-inflicted wounds for Ohio State. A lot of those self-inflicted wounds outside of the Travion Henderson unsportsmanlike conduct were on the offensive line, which we knew was patchwork because of the injuries that they sustained there. And you're going up against the defensive front with the talent that Texas has. Like, I don't know if that's self-inflicted wounds as much as, trying to survive a play and not get Will Howard killed. And so, like, I think that Texas played a phenomenal game, but it does come down to, Texas couldn't execute in the red zone. Texas offense, like, we hear it all the time. Like, there's nothing more dangerous than a Sarkisian script. Well, Ohio State and Jim Knowles were ready for the Sarkisian script. Like, they had to settle into something to do that. And, like, I do think that moving on from Quinn Ewers, we'll talk about that in a minute, whether that's the transfer portal or the NFL draft for Quinn Ewers, moving on to Arch Manning, getting CJ Baxter back. Like, I do think that the arrow is still pointing up for Texas, but Ohio State was the better team, and they proved it time and again in this game.
If only Texas had a 220-pound athletic quarterback that could have tried to run it in on the goal line, then maybe the Longhorns would be in the national championship. If only that guy existed on the roster. We talked about it in the pregame, exactly. Like, red zone stuff was the big issue. I think Ohio State could have pulled away even more if it wasn't for those penalties that were really just gumming up the works for them. I think their average third down distance was about 10 yards, and that average is brought up a lot by like 3rd and 20s and 3rd and 25s because they were facing those a lot in that game. The interesting thing is Jeremiah Smith was shut down, and then what 10P Kids just said in the chat, the toss at the one was terrible. It is terrible, but on the play before, they tried to run it up the middle. They did what everyone would want you to do, what everyone always says, just run it up the middle and try to bang your head into a stone wall. Penn State did that against Ohio State at the end of that game, tried 3 times, and it didn't work. They had to throw on 4th down, and they lost a game that they probably should have lost, but that they could have tied up at the end of regulation. I'm fine with going to the perimeter. You're more of a finesse team anyways. Caleb Downs made a ridiculous play. Like, people have been saying it, that play is going to be lost to history to the Jack Sawyer play because obviously that's just an amazing moment for Ohio State. But man, Caleb Downs is just a star for that defense, and he blew it up. And that's gonna happen every once in a while against a really good defense. I don't think they were gonna get it. They're not built to get 1 yard up the middle in a cloud of dust. So you can say it was terrible. The result was terrible, and it's similar to what Reed was saying. Like, things happen in games, and you have to have an opinion on it. But I don't think second guessing that makes a ton of sense, really, because your best bet if you're Texas is to try to beat that team to the perimeter.
All right, I'll give you guys a hot take. I'll give you a take. Texas lost that game not on the field. There was not one play during the Cotton Bowl. They actually lost it when Quinn Ewers went down with the oblique injury in week 4 or whatever it was, because that gave Texas fans a taste of Arch Manning, and it really put a ton of pressure on Quinn, where I don't think Quinn Ewers is very good, but it almost made it where if Quinn Ewers failed at anything, it would be, oh, well, you got to go to Arch. You got to warm up Arch. You got to bring an Arch for this package.
Yeah.
And put like an unfair type of pressure on Ewers, and also a weird dynamic in the locker room. And I'll also couch that with, I don't even know if Arch Manning's that good. And I think Texas fans might be eating their words a little bit next year. We'll see how it goes for them, and we'll see how Arch does as the true QB1 there. But I just think that no matter what would have happened to Texas, they were never going to shake that Arch Quinn dynamic one way or another. So ultimately, for me, what that game showed me was Ohio State didn't play their A game, I'd say. Played pretty well, though. I'd call it like a B+, A- game. They didn't play poorly by any means, but they did not like go nuts like they did against Tennessee and Oregon, and they still won by 2 touchdowns. And I know the late scoop and score or whatever, but like while the game was relatively close on the scoreboard, it didn't feel that close. Like, did you guys at any point think, wow, sure, the door was open for Texas to win, but did anyone really think like, oh, well, Texas is going to, like, this is Texas's game?
I mean, Reese Davis on the broadcast was, when they got on the 1 yard line was like, "Oh, Texas is about to tie it up here," and us knowing what we know about Texas's red zone struggles, I was like, "Hold your horses, brother. We're not in the end zone yet. We don't know if this is a tie ball game yet." So I do think Ohio State had control, and I also come out of this game feeling better about Ohio State, not just because it was hard not to feel good about them, after what they did in the first 2 rounds of the playoff, but at the same time, one of my issues with this Ohio State team has been, I think they're front runners, or I thought they were front runners. And whenever, things got hairy, whenever things got grimy, I thought that this team looked like a different team. You can go back to the Penn State game. Ohio State did not play a B+, A- game in that Penn State game, in my opinion. Like, they played like a B-, C+ game in there.
Yeah.
Like, if they played at the level that they played against Tennessee, that they played against Oregon, they would have boat raced Penn State in that game. And
they should have.
Yeah, they should have. Absolutely. And so the fact that they didn't, Ohio State has looked like a front runner. So the fact that they were able to get into a game where things weren't just, piling on, you weren't just, getting ahead of yourself, getting out in front and just running away with it. That showed me a lot of moxie, and that maybe the Ohio State actually has turned a corner to this point to where they can win no matter what, because they have the talent to do so. That's never been in question.
To your point, Reed, on the Quinn Arch dynamic, that might be a reason Sark was so hesitant to go to Arch in those short yardage packages and running. And I do think that got weird because it was a standing ovation basically every time you saw number 16 run out on the field since that injury has happened. So I like that theory, and I think it might be the reason Sark didn't lean on Arch as much as maybe he should have. And to Ohio State, I agree they didn't play as well, but I think a lot of that is credit to the Texas defense. Like, I think that's a really, really good Texas defense. We have a lot of proof of that. And I don't think the Notre Dame defense is quite as good. So it was maybe a little breadcrumb for later when we talk about that game.
Yeah, before we talk about the national championship, let's talk about Quinn Ewers. Let's talk about the portal. There was some big portal news over the weekend. Obviously, there's a ton we get into, and we're going to talk about the national championship, but worth bringing this up, I think, in terms of where the hierarchy of college football is going to be next season. Arch is going to slide into the number 1 slot on the depth chart for Texas. Carson Beck, Georgia quarterback, transferring to Miami, highest paid player in transfer portal history. I believe it's north of $4 million to play a year. That's also coming off of an elbow injury that cost him the postseason. He's recovering from elbow surgery. So we'll see how that goes. Miami going out and filling Cam Ward with Carson Beck. Still a few teams that we don't know where they're going to go. I would say, obviously, a lot of teams have some depth chart issues, but the real top of the food chain teams, if you go through, okay, so let's just start. I'm going to the 2026 national championship odds. We could assume, we don't really know who's technically a quarterback for, this is going down the odds. The favorite next year, Ohio State. We do not know who their starting quarterback is. Texas, Arch Manning. Georgia, we think Gunnar Stockton. Oregon, we think Dante Moore. Penn State, Drew Aller. Alabama, we have no idea. Notre Dame, we think Steve Angeli. Tennessee, Nico. Ole Miss, I don't know off the top of my head.
Austin
LSU,
Simmons, maybe.
LSU, Garrett Nussmeier. Clemson, Cade Klubnik. Texas A&M, Marcel Reed. I'll stop there. That's down. Those are all the teams 35-1 or better on the odds board over at FanDuel. So there's still a lot of teams. And I said a few where I was like, we think this person. There's not that many quarterbacks available, high-end quarterbacks at that are still available in the portal. So any teams really stick out to you? And then I'll also ask you should Quinn Ewers go pro, or should he take a bag to go to one of these high-end programs and play quarterback for them?
So I'll start. First off, I'm a Quinn Ewers truther. I'm not going to get off of that now. I'm way too deep in it. I understand all of the evidence against me at this point, but he does need to return to school. Going to the NFL draft would be a mistake right now. You're going to be QB4 at best because you're going to bank on the potential of a Jalen Milroe over him. So that's going to put you behind Ward and Sanders and Milroe at best. And that's not a guarantee that you're QB4 in that situation. You still have a Dylan Gabriel. You still have other guys in that mix. So I think he definitely needs to return to school. Georgia and Alabama make the most sense to me. I think that Ohio State, like, could he return back to where he started his college career? Maybe, but that's a weird optic situation. So I think Georgia and Alabama would make a lot of sense. I think, though, I think the dark horse in that conversation, who is not listed among the national championship odds, and not because I'm a homer, I think North Carolina would make a ton of sense. Get the Bill Belichick bump, spend some of that NIL war chest that he demanded to come to North Carolina, and see what you can do with Quinn Ewers, kind of elevating the quarterback position immediately for 1 year.
I agree that he should come back. I'm not a Quinn Ewers truther. I don't exactly think – I don't know how much that oblique injury affected him, but it seems like it certainly did, right? He's just not driving the ball outside the numbers. Everything's a touch throw. Different broadcasters have talked about it. It's just so obvious anytime you watch him. He just doesn't have the ability to step in and drive anything. And I guess if your ankle and your obliques hurt, you're not twisting, you're not pushing off, like that's possible. That's maybe going to be the situation. But I do think he's a veteran. He's for the most part a pretty good decision maker. He's been able to, like, the Sark script is great. Somebody's got to orchestrate that on the field, and Quinn's been pretty good at that. I think he probably, it's weird because before the broadcast, he unflinchingly said he's going to the NFL, and that was kind of always the plan. So I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case, but I also don't think it makes sense because I agree he's QB4 or worse. And for me, the team that jumps to mind is Oregon, right? You mentioned, Reed, that maybe it's Dante Moore. We think probably, but they're just getting off of Bo Nix for 2 years to Dylan Gabriel, 2 super seniors who have done this for a really long time, have a ton of starts under their belt. Dylan Gabriel, the most starts. And then Dante Moore's not like a super young quarterback. I think he'd be a redshirt sophomore at this point because he redshirted this year. But I just have a hard time believing that with Phil Knight in the stage of I'm throwing a bag at that program so they can win a national championship before I die. I think he's going to want a veteran there probably. And I think Dan Lanning will maybe go get Quinn Ewers. It just seems like a fit from that perspective. And I also think if Quinn's not driving the ball down the field as much, maybe you spread it out, get it underneath, get it to your playmakers type of system could work well for him. So Oregon's, we both kind of threw out a dark horse for Quinn. I think Oregon is the place I wouldn't be surprised if he ended up.
He very obviously has to go back to Ohio State because
who is going to be their quarterback?
Week 1 of the 2025 college football season, Ohio State plays host to Texas.
That's right. That's right.
The final stand where we can finally settle the Arch versus Quinn debates. Settle it in the horseshoe. Rematch of the Cotton Bowl, which whether Quinn goes back or not, that's going to be a banger game. But that's what I'm hoping for some of the takes that will come out of that game. But I think you both bring up 2 really good dark horses in North Carolina and Oregon. I don't know where Oregon's going to go after what happened last year. We'll see Dante Moore getting a year in the program. Maybe that makes them feel a little bit more comfortable and they want to kind of allocate resources elsewhere. Think it could be interesting what Oregon does next year. North Carolina, I think, is going to be a trendy name with all these high-level guys just because of you have Belichick there. You have some NIL money deployed there. As Tempe Kid says in the chat, it's Julian Say in time for Ohio State. I think I may have butchered his name. But, we'll see if we'll see where Quinn Ewers goes. He did say, though, prior to the Cotton Bowl that he's going pro. Like he said in one of those like pre-taped interviews, he's going pro. So we'll see how it goes for them. Let's talk about, though, this year's Ohio State team because they have one more game to play, the final game of the 2024 college football season. Very sad times, but it should be a great game. Ohio State, Notre Dame meeting in the national championship game in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. You have Ohio State laying 8.5. Money's come in on Notre Dame. Total 45.5. I will, before we talk about the X's and O's and all that stuff, this is obviously a rematch from last year's game where Ohio State went to South Bend and beat Notre Dame on the final play from scrimmage, 17-13. Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame infamously had only 10 men on the field as Ohio State ran it right up the middle for a touchdown. I think Marcus Freeman's learned his lesson. He's done some really good job coaching this season, so I think I imagine there will be 11 men on the field at all times. I think it's more likely they have 12 men on the field than 10 men. But I don't think that you can really glean a lot from that game, because if you go back and look at the box score, it's a whole different host of characters on both sides of the ball, really. Notre Dame last year had Sam Hartman. This year, or last year, Ohio State had Marvin Harrison and Kyle McCord. This year, it's obviously Will Howard, Jeremiah Smith, Quinshon Judkins in the mix at running back. Notre Dame with Riley Leonard and more of a run-heavy approach, as opposed to the Sam Hartman Notre Dame, where it was more based around the intermediate passing game. So, Cody, I'll give you first word here. What are you looking for in this national championship game, and maybe lead us towards your bet on this one?
Yeah, so kind of looking back at last year and the things that have changed, the other thing I look at was the offensive line was a strength for Notre Dame, and obviously it was already, patchworked from the beginning of the season with Jagusa being out for the entire season until the Orange Bowl, where he came back in and got forced into duty because of the more injuries that kept piling up on the offensive line. A compromised offensive line is not really what you want when you're going up against this Ohio State front. I've talked about Ohio State's offensive line being banged up, but this is not a great situation for Notre Dame. I have a really hard time seeing Notre Dame's offense being able to do a whole lot in this, because I think the way you attack this Ohio State defense is through the secondary and buying enough time to be able to get at these corners, who I don't think are as highly gifted as the front seven is. And so I don't think Notre Dame has the horses to do that. I don't think they have the quarterback to do that. And I don't think they have the offensive line to do that. I think Ohio State jumps on them early. I'm the one difference in these picks that we're going to make here, but it's basically the same thing. I'm going Ohio State -5.5 in the first half. I think they just jump all over them. I would not be surprised to see this at like 28-3, 28-10 at halftime. Like, I think Ohio State jumps all over them, because Notre Dame has a good defense. They don't have a great defense, and we've seen what good defenses can do. We thought Tennessee had a great defense. Turns out it was just a good defense, and Ohio State jumped all over them.
Josh, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, those injuries along the offensive line. Anthony Knapp is going to be out. Tosh Baker on the right side was allowed 5 pressures against Penn State. That's kind of an Abdul Carter stat, but it's also this isn't a great offensive line stat. Jagusa, I'm not exactly sure how to say it, but he's probably going to be in at left tackle. So like their preseason starters back, but there's injuries on both sides of the offensive line for both teams. At least Ohio State has dealt with them already and knows what their group is going into this. They feel comfortable with Donovan Jackson out at left tackle and all the changes they've needed to make. It hasn't been a huge problem. And that's to my big point before making my pick. It's on the other side of the ball conveniently. How do you stop the Ohio State offense? You dare them to run the ball, and you stop them with 4 down linemen and 5, 6 in the box. Michigan can do that because of Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Texas can do that because just all the bodies they rotate along that defensive line, Alfred Collins, everybody. I don't think Notre Dame can do that. So Michigan's stuff rate, which is runs held to, I believe, 2 or less yards against Ohio State, 35%. Texas's stuff rate against Ohio State, 27%. Notre Dame's on the season is 13.8%, 16th percentile in the country. This is not what Notre Dame does. They don't beat you with their linemen, and Riley Mills is out. That makes things worse. The secondary is the strength for Notre Dame. So I'm thinking that Ohio State and Chip Kelly are going to say, oh, we actually can run the ball the way we thought we were going to when we recruited Will Howard and Quinshon Judkins. We can kind of play a little bit of bully ball in this one. And then once they commit bodies, oh yeah, we still have Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith over the top, and Carnell Tate and G. Scott and because it's Ohio State and this team is loaded, and it's just so hard to believe that it lost 2 games. So I'm taking the Buckeyes again, and I'm taking the -8 or 8.5, whatever the best number we can get right now is, but I'm taking the Buckeyes.
Yeah, I hate to just be like a confirmation bias chamber, but I do think that Notre Dame's going to be swimming upstream in this one. And I kind of alluded to it when we were talking at the Cotton Bowl, is that Ohio State didn't really play its A game, and they still won by 2 touchdowns against what is a pretty clearly better team, better, more complete team than Notre Dame, and that's Texas. What I find most difficult for Notre Dame in this one is the fact that Ohio State is a top 5 rush defense. They are top 5 in EPA per rush and yards per carry allowed. And while Jeremiah Love looks spry, he still was quote unquote limited in that one. And he only finished the game with like 12 carries. Like, I don't see an ability for Notre Dame to get into favorable downs and distances and then spam Riley Leonard on like 3rd and 4th and short and just get the first down and move down the field. Because Ohio State is the number 1 team in the country in success rate. So you're going to have to hit those deep passes to move the ball on them. Again, another case where if you look at Notre Dame's scoring drives against Penn State, it wasn't super consistent. I would say their best drive was the one at a half where they ran the ball at will. They had the scoring drive where Steve Angeli got him into field goal range. I think that one was a little kind of weird and fluky. Then they obviously had the touchdown drive to Greathouse, and I'm missing another touchdown drive in there. But I think my point stands that it's going to be tough to move the ball right down the field on this Ohio State team that is probably going to be able to win without committing extra bodies in the box and dare Riley Leonard, who had 2 interceptions in the game against Penn State, facing better secondary now. You have Caleb Downs kind of roaming free there. So I think it's going to be tough. You also look at pass blocking grades. Ohio State was all over Quinn Ewers, all over him. That Texas offensive line, 2nd in the country in pass blocking grade prior to the Cotton Bowl. Notre Dame is 81st. So we mentioned bodies rotating in and out. Yeah, Jagusa is back at starting left tackle, but he did suffer a torn pec that cost him his entire regular season. So I don't know if he's 100%. And on the other side, I look back to that Notre Dame Penn State game and say, man, 0 catches for wide receivers. You look back at that Georgia game, pretty mediocre wide receiver room and a backup quarterback. Okay. Then you look back at Indiana, they don't have this ceiling that Ohio State has. So where I look back to is the USC Notre Dame game for where did like a high octane passing offense face off against Notre Dame. And if you remember that game, yes, Jaden Maava had 2 pick sixes that kind of threw the game out of whack. They also scored 35 points and went up and down the field. So I do think that there are going to be opportunities for Ohio State to take the top off. And I think this could be a big game for like a Emeka Egbuka in the slot against Jordan Clark, the Notre Dame cornerback. So all that to say, I like Ohio State. I think they win this game in a blowout. So I sent if you guys remember, the first Notre Dame-Alabama national championship game was 42-10 tied. It was that one. It made the news recently when like Manti Te'o was like, he's like, yeah, we were about to walk out and we saw all the guys in Alabama. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah. The Notre Dame team just went quiet in the tunnel because they saw the difference. Like, I think there's that potential too.
So I sent, after Notre Dame won the Orange Bowl, I sent to a few of my buddies a screenshot of like the box score. And I was like, if Ohio State wins, here's the final score. Here's the box score for Ohio State, Notre Dame. So I like Ohio State. I think this team just has way too many answers. And look, I've been wrong about Notre Dame pretty much this entire postseason. So what's one more pick against them going to do? So I'll take Ohio State.
No,
Jumping in. Go ahead, Cody.
No, I was just going to say, I found a prop that's not a player prop. We are going to, discuss some player props here in a minute. But I found a prop that kind of plays into kind of everything we're saying. There's a prop on DraftKings for the largest lead, over 16.5 at plus 100. Looking there pretty heavily because I do think this one has the potential to get out of hand, like Reed was just laying out.
Yeah, that's something that I definitely like. And Reed, I'm glad you brought up the passing off at like the USC game. And Notre Dame has the number 1 passing defense in the country when you look at EPA per drop back and things like that. But Benjamin Morrison's been out for a while, and that's kind of buoyed by a schedule that includes, Army and Navy. And yes, those teams throw it a little bit now, but they're not dropping back 20, 30 times a game. when Louisville played Notre Dame, Tyler Shuck was able to throw it around a little bit, 264 and 3 touchdowns in that one. And then obviously the Maeva performance, he threw for 360 and 3 touchdowns. In the playoff, they're facing Penn State, no wide receivers. Georgia, no wide receivers and a backup quarterback. And as you mentioned, Indiana, Curtis Rourke under pressure. He just was a different quarterback and he played the season with a torn ACL. So like credit to him, but every time he saw a good defense, which was twice, he turned into a pumpkin. So I really think it's the first game in a while, other than that USC game, when the Benjamin Morrison injury is going to be a big deal. And I think the Notre Dame passing defense is a bit of fool's gold.
Yeah, I would say a big thing for Notre Dame in this one is obviously hot start. I don't see this team doing well playing from behind, but also this team was number 1 in the country in turnovers gained in the regular season. They proved against Georgia. They proved against Penn State and Indiana. They can turn you over. And Will Howard he's playing at a super high level, but he's not without faults and he's not without making a few mistakes. So I think Notre Dame, look, the defense has been incredible. I've been super impressed with them. Maybe they get a short field out of this. Maybe they steal a possession here or there, but you're going to need those things to go your way. And I just find myself thinking of this game similar to how I thought about Penn State SMU. Cody, if you remember, I was like, we were talking about what's the path for SMU to upset Penn State. And I was like, got to hit a few explosives. You got to turn the opponent over a lot, a team that's better than you. You got to really like steal some things and have the game really bounce your way. Like when you start doing that, you're really starting to talk yourself into like, it's not going to happen. Obviously, again, it can happen. But when you start to say, if you got to win the turnover battle by 2, you got to do this, things that are kind of fluky, it's just a tough thing to go to war with when you're betting this one. So that's kind of where I landed on with Ohio State.
No, 100%. And like, I also think that, you talk about the 2 best passing offenses maybe that they faced all season with Louisville and USC. Will Howard's a better quarterback than both of those guys. I'm not even a big Will Howard guy, but he's a better quarterback than Jane Maeva or Tyler Shuck. And I also think that, to your point that you just made, Reed, like Will Howard is not immune to mistakes, but one of the things I've been really impressed with throughout the playoff is not forcing the issue. I think that was his issue a lot of the times throughout the regular season, was whether it was force feeding Jeremiah Smith or just trying to force the ball downfield. He's been much more prone to taking what's there, whether that's I think that's why we saw Carnell Tate have a big game, because that was the matchup he could exploit in that one. So I think that Will Howard has progressed in this system and knows what he's going to be able to take, what he can get. And there are going to be things he can take in this game against this Notre Dame defense.
Yeah. What about, we'll start with Josh. Josh, any player props matchups that you are targeting that you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, I have a couple on each side. It's kind of a game script thing for Ohio State, right? It's dangerous to do this sometimes. You're just backing yourself into a corner. If they don't get an early lead, maybe these don't come through. But Quinn Judkins over 57.5. I think Travion Henderson's probably the better back in that backfield. But I also think, similar to how I thought it was a Katron Allen game for Penn State against Notre Dame, and it largely was except the red zone, I think it'll be a Quinshon Judkins between the tackles kind of game. Notre Dame doesn't give up the explosives, so maybe don't hunt them with Henderson and just get 6 yards a pop. I think they'll be able to. So over 57.5 for Judkins. And then Will Howard under 30.5 pass attempts. I think they'll be able to throw the ball on Notre Dame. If they get a big lead, they maybe aren't going to have to. So those are the 2 on the Ohio State side. And then I'll just unload on the Notre Dame ones as well. Jaden Greathouse under 25.5 receiving yards. I smashed the over when it was 11.5 last game. It was 11.5 last game. And this is a pretty significant jump. He's now their leading receiver on the season, but that was a Penn State situation with no slot corner to speak of. That's just not going to be the case against Ohio State. So I'm going to take the under on that. And then Aeneas Williams, anytime touchdown, plus 500. I just like the way they used him. He caught 5 passes. He's getting more and more involved, the freshman running back. Even if Jeremiah Love's healthy, I think they're going to just find a way to get Williams on the field, because he's a dynamic player. And we didn't really talk about a path too much for Notre Dame. And I guess it is just that backfield dominates and they get 4 or 5 yards a pop, and a guy like Williams breaks one. So maybe that's a little insurance for me, but I think they really get him involved, and I like that number.
Yeah, I played some early Aeneas Williams over receiving yards because I agree with you. I think that they have to it's going to have to be the backfield, and Williams, I mean, pretty much a full split with Jeremiah Love in terms of passing snaps. So Williams, he's been targeted the entire postseason. His role continues to grow. Maybe Love's a little bit more healthy this game, but I still think Williams as a pass catcher. I imagine that's where you're going in terms of like anytime touchdowns, like something out of the backfield.
Yeah.
As a pass catcher, I should say. But yeah, no, all good looks there. Cody, anything else or anything else on your end? I know you mentioned the largest lead prop. What about player props?
Yeah, so player props. I like G Scott over 17.5 receiving yards. I think in the interest of taking what you can get, not putting the ball in harm's way, especially if you're playing with a lead, the tight end is going to be valuable. I think that the middle of the field is going to be open a little bit as Notre Dame tries to generate pressure and rely on their secondary. So I think G Scott, 2 first down completions and we get over the 17.5 number. So I like that. On the other side of the ball, I like Riley Leonard under 35.5 rushing yards. And that's very much because of the sack adjusted college numbers, because I think that we see the box get stacked against him, not to, throw in the name of this fine program in here, but I do think the box is stacked against Riley Leonard. And I think when he tries to evade pressure, it's going to be a bad time for him with the athletes that Ohio State's going to be able to bring after him. So I think that 35.5, even with design runs, I think that's a little generous for what's going to happen with Riley Leonard.
Yeah, I think another way to look at Leonard in terms of his rushing attempts isn't a bad look. He had 18 against Penn State, and I mentioned the third and fourth down they didn't waste any plays. They're like, we're going forward with you in the 11-man run game. So sacks count for rush attempts in college football. Obviously, rushing yards count, so do rushing attempts. So if you think Leonard's going to keep the rock, you think they're going to be behind, that might be a way to play it, as Leonard just kind of takes off with his legs and tries to do it on his own or just gets sacked. For me, the matchup I really like in this game is Emeka Egbuka over 55.5 receiving yards. So Egbuka operates out of the slot, and that's the real weak point of of Notre Dame's defense with Jordan Clark. We saw against USC. I keep going back to that game because I just think that's kind of the best comp. But you go back to that game and you see that, as I pull up my notes, Deuce Robinson, Mekhi Lemon, all those guys had catches against Jordan Clark operating out of the slot. So I think that this is a really good matchup for Egbuka. Doesn't sound great, but I mean, Jeremiah Smith off of what do you have? 1 catch for 4 yards. Mm-hmm. I think Al Golden, he's going to take a page out of that Michigan Texas playbook, try and bracket Smith, try and mix in zone and man coverage. Smith's numbers go way down against zone. Egbuka pretty stable across the board. So I think Egbuka in the mid-50s, he should get over. He had 3 catches on the first drive and then kind of eased out. I see Tempe kids. He likes anytime touchdown on Egbuka. But I think Egbuka over Smith under isn't too terrible. I could see Egbuka, I don't know if they have this up, like leading the game in receiving yards. I think this matchup sets up really well for him to have a big game. And I mean, if you want to plug your nose and trust that Jeremiah Smith gets limited, I think Notre Dame knows that they need to try and shut the water off as much as possible. Smith is really the true game breaker. I think they try and say, hey, no Smith, anybody else can beat us, similar to what Texas did. I mean, the guy had 1 catch. We were talking about Greathouse up from 11.5 to 25.5. Yeah. Smith was at, I think, like somewhere in the mid-80s. Now he's down to 80.5. He had 1 catch for 4 yards. And I know how good he is. I understand that. I'm not saying he's bad, but just a big number. And there's like a lot of ways where that number doesn't cash.
I'm on team stay away from Jeremiah Smith props because you're making great points. 2 catches and this could be absolutely toast. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like 2 50-yard catches are not out of the realm of possibility for Jeremiah Smith because he is that talented. So I'm on team stay away because I think I know Al Golden and he is going to try to take away Jeremiah Smith, but taking away Jeremiah Smith is not something that happens very often.
Josh, any thoughts on how Notre Dame tries to slow down Ohio State?
Yeah, I think the strategy, like as I mentioned, is you have to win up front with your defensive line and not stack the box, as I also invoke the name of the program, Cody. But you're just not going to be able to win that way when you don't have multiple future first round picks along your defensive line, and Notre Dame doesn't have it. So I looked at the Jeremiah Smith number for a while to that conversation, and I just couldn't bring myself to confidently take the under either, because Texas is a really good defense. They have Jahdae Barron to throw at him, and a really good secondary that's much improved from last year, was much improved from last year. Notre Dame has a good secondary too, but just to think about what we were saying about Jeremiah Smith after the Rose Bowl, when the whole plan was, we're getting the dude the rock because he is the best player on this offense, 18-year-old or not. I find it hard to believe that Chip Kelly's gonna, if this game gets close at all, that Chip Kelly and Ryan Day are gonna go down with Jeremiah Smith having one catch in the last 2 games of their season. I think there's a chance for some force feeding possibly. So that's why I stayed away from it as well. You have better intestinal fortitude than me, Reed, to go with that under. That's just terrifying.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes. I haven't bet that one yet, but that number is really high.
Do it, take it.
That's a big number.
The math is right, but it's Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah, he transcends mathematics.
That's right.
And then we didn't really discuss it, but the Ohio State backfield, both Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins lined at 57.5. It seems like Judkins is still getting the primary carries and Henderson's more of the change of pace back. I'd argue Henderson is the better running back. I mentioned it on the show, 6 carries, 42 yards, went under that prop that I gave out, which is annoying. But obviously the big explosive play is a receiving prop. If you're buying into Henderson as a pass catcher, 20.5, 2.5 receptions, like those numbers can be beat with one play. Obviously the receiving yards, not the receptions.
No, and I think I agree with you. I think Travion Henderson is the better back, but I also think he is the better back because of this timeshare. He's obviously struggled with health throughout his career, and you're just keeping him, you're keeping him in the cryogenic chamber. You know what I mean? And unleashing him when you need him. And so it's kind of a catch-22 where, yeah, I would love to see Travion Henderson get 20 carries a game and see what that would look like. But at the same time, I don't think you get the best version of Travion Henderson if you do that.
Speaking of keeping him in the cryogenic chamber or whatever, like keeping bullets in the chamber, do you think there's a chance, either of you, that Ohio State says, we've been protecting Will Howard, but we did kind of bring him here to be a physical runner? I think he carried the ball 5 times against Notre Dame. He would have had a touchdown if he didn't trip. So maybe that, spurns some confidence from that coaching staff. But I think he was brought there to be a real part of the running game, and it just never really materialized this season. They were worried about keeping him healthy, obviously, and for good reason, with such a good roster. He kind of turned into a point guard distributor guy. But do they say, it's the national championship now, we're going to run this guy because we think it can be a valuable part of our offense? And you look at an over rushing attempts for Will Howard or something like that. Because I was peaking that way, but I want to get your opinion on it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes total sense. Last game of the year, might as well let it fly. And if you do remember in the Cotton Bowl, the drive that put Ohio State ahead, they went for it on 4th down. It was QB power. Like you mentioned, he kind of slipped and fell and didn't score a touchdown. But when the chips were down, they went with their quarterback, similar to how, I was talking about Riley Leonard rush attempts, how Notre Dame uses Riley Leonard, that QB power. They did it with Will Howard, and it worked pretty well. What was it, like a 20-yard gain?
Yeah, and would have been more.
No, and I'm with both of you. I guess my trepidation, to play devil's advocate, if this game does get to blowout city pretty early, there's no need to run Will Howard in that scenario. Yeah. And so that's where that could get a little tricky. But in terms of the general look before we see the game script play out, I definitely think it's definitely worthwhile, because if it is a closer game than we imagine, Chip Kelly's not going to leave any meat on the bone. He's going to throw everything he has at this Notre Dame defense.
Rushing yards for Will Howard, I think the prop is 11.5, 12.5. Most places in rushing attempts, you're looking at 6.5 for the over, juiced a little bit to the over. So those are ones to look at if you're hunting for some extra props, and we didn't fill your board enough.
Yeah.
No,
All right.
I like the I was just gonna say I like the yards a little bit more than the attempts because
I think I do too.
Like QB, like one good QB run and like keeping him protected behind the offensive line, like you can hit it's not as game script dependent, I guess is what I'm getting at.
Mhm.
I think I like attempts because
Oh, okay.
knees are attempts. So
That's
you
fair.
take
That's fair.
three knees could go a long way to getting over a 6.5.
That's a fun one. If you're waiting out 2 knees or 3 knees right there at the end. You're in it right to the end for a game that might not be that
until
close.
the bitter end. All right, before we get out of here, final score predictions, and we'll wrap up. Cody,
I'm gonna go Ohio State 31, Notre Dame 13. I don't think this is particularly close, and I think, I just don't see Notre Dame's offense being able to do a whole lot in this one.
Yeah, I'll go 35-17 with a garbage time touchdown from Notre Dame, a little specificity to the final score, but I think it's not even as close as it looks, and it doesn't look particularly close.
Yeah, I'll go with I said I shared the final box score. So I'll go with the same exact score as the 2015, I think it was, national championship game. I think 2014. Give me Ohio State 42, Notre Dame 10. So with that being said, we're all in Ohio State blowout territory. Notre Dame, congratulations on your national championship.
Yeah, somebody's got to get a graphic together for when this blows up in our face and we have 3 Ohio State logos next to our faces.
Yeah, 100%. So congratulations to Notre Dame. Tempe kids who's been riding with us all season. He likes the Buckeyes. I think he said he's a noted Buckeyes fan. 38-17 in favor of the Buckeyes. So Tempe kids, you're in on this. Congrats to Notre Dame winning their national championship with all our confidence. So we will be back to recap the national championship next week. We go through everything that happened there, talk some more portal, maybe some look ahead stuff to next season. For myself, Reed Wallach, thank you as always, Cody and Josh, for coming in the last few weeks. It's been great having you on. Enjoy the national championship, get those final bets in, and we will see you next week to recap it all.
We'll see you.